Hiya there guys, I'm back this evening to do another history movie review, and this one is going to be for a fantastic film from the 1980s that I've recently watched, and this one is following on with the theme of a lot of my French Revolution fascination in terms of history. This one is called Danton, named after the famous French revolutionary figure Georges Danton. This is a 1983 movie that came out pretty much in the midst of the Cold War. The attraction for this movie is that it was starring one of France's pretty much greatest ever actors, Gerard Depardieu, and also a legendary Polish filmmaker, which was Andrzej Wajda. And this film, which was quite interesting in terms of the time period, I'll go into that shortly, but first things first, just to ask you if you wouldn't mind kindly subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like if you did like what you were hearing, and of course obviously any comment is much appreciated, and any recommendations for reviews as well, I'd much like to hear those as well. But anyways, on to the movie. This is, like I say, this is a film version of a play that came out in the 1920s called The Trial of Danton. And if you've seen my previous videos on the French Revolution, particularly the two movies, which is La Révolution Française, there's a particular part in towards the end, or the midpoint and the end of the second movie, and this is in regards to the trial, or show trial you should say, political witch trial of Georges Danton. So the summary of the film is that we have one of the most influential figures of the French Revolution has returned to Paris. Georges Danton has spent time away. His wife had died, and he retreated to the country to sort of regather himself. In the meantime, he found a new wife, which didn't take him very long at all. In the meantime, his absence, prior to his absence, he'd helped set up a large revolutionary bureaucratic machine that was really there effectively to process summary justice, as well as establish a firm bureaucratic state in order to manage the affairs of the country, who were pretty much being attacked on all sides by different monarchies across Europe who wanted to restore the king and queen. By this point that was no longer an option, but to pretty much punish and overthrow this, as they saw it was a rebellion against the monarchy of France. And one of the things that Georges Danton had created prior to his leaving Paris was the Revolutionary Tribunal, and this tribunal was set up effectively to process people who were suspected of being traitors, who were dual loyalties, people who were making profit, and basically going against the grain of, as you could say, in terms of the actual flow of where the revolution was going. It was lurching farther to the west, sorry, to the left in terms of the political compass, and each successive administration and government that had come in to try to control the sort of the rabble, the mob mentality of the Parisian underclass, as well as this sort of middle upper class, non-aristocratic middle class, you could say, who were using this revolution as an opportunity to craft their own power base, as well as to exploit it for their own ends as well. I mean, we see people like Danton, who before the revolution was a lawyer in Paris, a decent one at that as well, but you know, probably would have been obscure to history later on had this event never happened. Same as Maximilien Robespierre, you know, provincial lawyer who came to Paris and effectively became the archetypal cookie cutout of the modern day dictator, which we'll go into now. So just a main point. So Danton left a legacy of a very firm bureaucratic state in order to marshal all the resources of the country in order to meet the threat of an invasion. At the time the film is set, France is doing okay on the battlefield. At this time, they started warding off their invasion prospects by the Prussians and the Austrians, and it actually turned the tide somewhat, and started actually going into the Austrian Netherlands, which is what we call modern day Belgium, and lower Holland as well. So effectively, things were looking all right at this point. In the it's 1794. Danton arrives back in Paris with his pretty young wife and his children. There is a firm sort of hubbub about his return. The Parisians seem absolutely destitute, and I will say I did like how the movie portrayed Paris and revolutionary France in all warts and all imagery, as opposed to the previous films I did, which was La Révolution Française, which really does show the sort of, there's a palace there, there's a palace here, there's everybody in set piece costumes and everybody looking prim and proper, and we have a few scenes where things don't go so well. Whereas in this film you do see, the sort of the grit, the underbelly, the sort of the poverty of people, the destituteness of people, the tyranny of ordinary people, and the dictatorship of Robespierre as well, and the extremism of Saint-Just as well, which is quite important. So what we see in this film, we see the setup immediately of an incumbent government led by Maximilien Robespierre. He is the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, along with his acolytes, mainly being Louis Saint-Just, a young, extreme sort of person who's latched onto the revolution as a way to advance his own sort of and sort of apply his own sense of how the world and society should be. He is instrumental, Saint-Just, in being one of the first people to call for the death of the king. And he, as in his own words, he said that a king can only rule or they can die, and there is nothing else that a king or a monarch can do. So in order for the revolution to survive and the republic to survive, the king needed to die. Otherwise there would be constant threats from external threats to put them back onto the throne as well. So we see already that Saint-Just has latched on as like the Robin to Robespierre's Batman, if you will, and Robespierre is quite ill at this time. The illness that he's going to develop, and it's going to get a lot worse in 1794. We see in this early dawn, so it could be a form of pneumonia. The film takes place in sort of really wet, drab conditions in Paris as well. And when you do get to the summer months, particularly at that period in time as well, there were malaria-like diseases that were constantly floating around the general population as well. So it wouldn't, it could even have been something like bronchitis as well. But certainly there was something that was really troubling and laying up Robespierre at a crucial time in 1794. But he was still firmly in control as the de facto leader of the committee. They saw Danton's return as an immediate threat to their power base. There were previous factions which had gone by the wayside. So from the start of the revolution, you've got the Ancien regime, the monarchy had fallen. Then we have the National Assembly, which effectively then was taken over by the Girondins and transformed into the National Convention. So the Girondins were more of your centre-left political tribe. They were not as extreme as the Jacobins were, and also people, the Sans-Culotte, the general sort of rabble-rousers in Paris, as well as the artisans, merchants and so forth, the labourers who would later on become more of like a partisan mobbing force on the streets of Paris, and you see that early doors in the film where they're checking people's papers coming into the city and wearing the red Frisian cap as well, wearing the long trousers, which wasn't really the style of the time. That's where the name Sans-Culotte comes from. These guys are the enforcers effectively, and what we see then is from the Girondins, they are overthrown by the Jacobins, and the Jacobins entail both Robespierre and Danton. Now, this is where we're starting to slice the cheese very thin now. So we've already cut off a substantial part of the political spectrum, and now we've gone further to the left. So where we have the Jacobins taken over. The Jacobins have taken over. They set up the two committees, which are the Committee of Public Safety, which is the main sort of de facto government, ruled by committee, led by Robespierre, and also there's another committee called the Committee of General Security. And whilst they can't do anything without each other say so, effectively the Committee of Public Safety has the most influential people, revolutionary heads at the time in that committee. So we have Danton come back. He is part of the same faction. However, he is not. He is seen, particularly by people like Saint-Just and Couthon, as a malign influence. And really, what the difference between the two comes about is that not only is it a clash of personalities, it's a clash really about where the revolution is going to be going. You have a really sort of whiter than white, idealistic person in one corner, which is Maximilien Robespierre, somebody who comes out of the school of Jean-Jacques Rousseauian social contract thinking, a very utilitarian person, somebody who uses a lot of rhetoric and romance language and speaks in extremis, somebody that really does read that if you're not wholly in agreement with him, then there is some sort of moral defect within you, rather than the fact that you just may disagree. You both have the same opinion about where where the sort of end goal needs to be. The sort of manner in which you can disagree on, that would be probably a bit too nuanced for him. I mean, the guy was an intelligent person anyway, but Robespierre was very, very much a somebody you could even see as a modern day sort of activist, as you could put it that way, in the sense that you need to be whiter than white, you need to be incorruptible, and if you aren't, you're going to be destroyed, and I'm going to be the one to destroy you. And quite often, as we see in the film, Robespierre in the National Convention giving speeches, somebody with a very excellent way of crafting a perfect speech and giving incredible amounts of logic in his arguments. I mean, despite some of the arguments that he did give for the laws that were enacted were incredible, really, and particularly if you take them on face value about what the laws are, you would out of hand just dismiss them and say no chance, no fucking way. Things like the law of suspects, summary arrest without warrant, people who can be detained without warrant. You can be hauled before the Revolutionary Tribunal on accusations without actually without any proof, and then possibly even go to the guillotine. There was the 22 Prairial, I think, as well, was the other one, which so there's quite a few instances where Robespierre is able to use his rhetoric to sort of push forward his sort of idealistic perfect world. He believes in a utopia that people are born free, loving, caring, angelic animals, and it's the world and society and the church and the monarchy and the structures of human society are what chains humans to behaving poorly, to crime, to poor life choices. Poor life choices are not the choice of you as an individual, they're the choice of the system. which I think that most people who can understand that type of logical way of thinking can really identify with with today's sort of what you would call leftist ideology, which is very, very Marxian in nature, proto-Marxian you could say as well. But the so we have that in one corner. In the other corner, we have Georges Danton. Now, Georges Danton, although portrayed as the hero of the movie in some shape or form, Georges Danton is definitely a shade of grey. He's not a hero in any shape or form. Georges Danton is the creator of the Revolutionary Tribunal, which sent thousands, tens of thousands of people to their deaths and the guillotine. I mean, whether he did it himself and signed them off is beside the point. He is the creator of that, as well as he used it whilst it was prudent to use it during war, in order to sort of stave off any internal problems while France was suffering the early defeats on the battlefield, places like Verdun, against the Austrians and Prussians as well. So Danton is more of your he's a sort of a people's man, a man's man, modern day politician, the sort of type of person you would see in America today, giving a stump speech, tapping hands, having a beer with everybody. He's like a Nigel Farage type person who does come from that sort of middle upper class elite. He is a lawyer by trade. He can identify with the working man, however, and that sort of that resonance with the working person and with the average Frenchman is, can't be underestimated. And effectively, that is the entire basis about what Danton is able to hedge his bets in the film to sort of take on the Revolutionary Tribunal at his own trial. So Danton, very much a womanizer, a big drinker, a party man. He had pockmarked scars all over his face. He wasn't a very attractive guy, a little bit overweight, massive round head. He looked more like a pit bull terrier than anything else, is what he's been described as. Really deep voice, incredible rhetoric, but could be very, very intimidating in terms of anger and flashes of anger. And I think that Gerard Depardieu does a fantastic job of showing that. He does put it across as a very softly spoken man in the film, but there are moments in the film where you see the flash of anger and you see him cut through and get straight to the point, mainly when he's speaking to Robespierre when they have their conference. But anyways, what I think another part of the movie is quite interesting is that this came out in 1983. At the time, you had the Soviet Union, as we know now, would fall in 1991, and the Berlin Wall would come down. But Poland at the time was really sort of fighting with its resisting against communist oppression, particularly through their solidarity movement as well, which is mentioned on the Wikipedia page. And I think that is a very, very interesting and a very obvious parallel with the French Revolution, in the sense that Danton's sort of popularity and basis of power and support is certainly thumbing the nose at the massive bureaucratic, alien, remote committee regime in Paris, very much how the Politburo was in Moscow during the years of the Soviet Union, which is a good parallel to see as well. So yeah, definite fantastic influence there from a brilliant director as well. So we've got the main climax of the movie, and so the bread and butter of the movie is the trial itself. And Danton has opportunities prior to the trial, his show trial, to effectively become dictator, to become the leader of the country. There is General Westerman, the short curly head fat general, who is urging Danton to marshal the troops, so I can get an army to come to Paris. We can overthrow the government, we can institute new government, we can do away with the tribunal, we can end the terror, we can do whatever you want. We believe in you and your version of where the revolution needs to go, rather than the sort of utopian, impossibly utopian, dangerously dangerously bloody path that is being tread by the Committee of Public Safety, where despotism and tyranny is certainly the flavour of the day, as well as terror. And Danton has the opportunity to do so and turns it down. He believes that the way to break the wheel and break the power of the Committee of Public Safety is to actually defeat it through argument, defeat it through the means in the Revolutionary Tribunal, to show it up for what it is, effectively to use his rhetoric and his oratory to invigorate the population to overthrow this government, as in the past it had overthrown the monarchy, it had overthrown the Girondins to a degree as well, along with Jacobin scheming. But what we see in the trial, we have his good friend Camille Desmoulins, who is a pamphleteer and a journalist who has a very close relationship to Robespierre, and he's definitely the one link between the two men. Who, I mean, we see him as a very childlike person in this movie, who is dealing very, very hard with the fact that two of his closest friends and closest political allies are actually going and smacking seven bells out of each other, and this is a very deadly, bloody game, particularly at this time in the revolution. And all the power, all the cards lie with Robespierre. Danton is very much the underdog, but he does have the ability for the knockout punch, which is at the trial. So, but we see the heartache really of Desmoulins' arrest as well, and Robespierre signing off on the arrest of his good friend, his childhood friend. He's a godfather to his son, to Desmoulins' son, and really shows you that the cost that was bared, and the man in which Robespierre was as well, in that irrespective of family or friendship or attachments like being a godfather, if you got in the way of his utopian view of France, you were dead. You were dead to rights, and that does come through in the film as well. I thought the fellow who played Robespierre was absolutely superb. Correct height. I wouldn't say the resemblance is right. I think he may be a bit too old to play Robespierre, but I think that he was excellent nonetheless. Gerard Depardieu as Danton is fantastic. Probably could have stood to put on a little bit more weight, but he's superb, and he was really on a run of hits in the 1980s himself as well there. But the climax of the movie comes at the tribunal after Robespierre and Danton are unable to patch things up. Danton is arrested. He's taken to I think it is I don't know whether it's the menagerie or the orangerie or the conciergerie, one of those palaces that were sequestered. Well, they were commandeered as prisons later on, and he's kept in prison. And what the Revolutionary Tribunal used to do was they used to hold you and other petty criminals together in one, as to sort of give the appearance that you were no better than the petty criminals on the street. It could be a rapist, it could be a thief, it could be a murderer, it could be X, Y, or Z. But they're all lumped in together along with the political enemies, which were the Dantonist faction here. So Danton is using pretty much using correct logic. He's appealing to the people, the crowd. He's told by the senior prosecutor Fouquier-Tinville not to do so. Danton is undoubtedly, he knows the ins and outs and the legality of what the tribunal can and can't do. He's using that against the tribunal, and he starts to get momentum. It's going as he wants. He's really starting to get momentum. The first two appearances in court, he does start to hammer home arguments, and the fact that this is a political witch trial and that there's no basis for his arrest or Demoulins' arrest or Westerman's arrest at all. There's nothing at all in the sense that the Committee of Public Safety are tyrants. Now this really does show their arrest. This shows it's tyranny and that they are no better than the monarchy that they've overthrown. And that appeal to the average French person is very, very important. This is what Danton wants, to cause an insurrection that will, overthrow the government, and effectively him being a spearhead and being a popular man hopefully will have him rise to the top and become either president, king, dictator, whatever they wanted to call him. So we see this trial going very, very badly, and the Committee of Public Safety understand the gravity about where this is going, and you've got certain members in that committee who are very, very much against the idea of Danton coming out. They know that if he succeeds, there is very, very, like I say, this is a game of win or lose, and this is a game of death at this point in the French Revolution. If when one faction falls, they get killed effectively. There's very, very few instances and few people who are able to cross political lines and boundaries and are able to survive during this time, because effectively you had to sort of nail your colours to the mast in terms of your allegiance to a political party, as it was said. Even people like Napoleon later on would be sort of under threat because he was a Jacobin and served the brother of Robespierre, Augustin Robespierre, later on in 1794, and in 1795 he was very, very much under threat. Even people later on like Talleyrand, who was the foreign minister of France. Talleyrand served both the king, he served the revolutionary government, and he served the emperor, which was Napoleon later on. So serving three different forms of government, and he changed his allegiances quite often. But in this particular time, 1794, that is not an option at all. You are who you are, you fight for your team, and it is literally win or die. And we get to this point where the Committee of Public Safety are locked in their meeting and they're thinking, fuck, we can't let this guy win now. Even if we didn't agree in the beginning about when he got arrested and how he got arrested, we need now to follow through with this gamble, because if we don't, we are fucking dead, and we need to do anything we can to get this guy convicted. So they forge evidence, they throw rumour, and they throw everything they can at Danton in the tribunal. He begins to lose his voice. I don't know how much of that is true or whether that is just Depardieu being ill in filming, I don't know. But we see Danton's influence beginning to sort of wane in the trial, and the bureaucratic sort of shenanigans behind the scenes really overtaking and pouring that rubber stamp on the death warrant, which is Danton's death warrant to the guillotine. And effectively we know this is going to be a Pyrrhic victory for Robespierre, because Robespierre is eliminating one of his closest allies, because he sees him as a threat, rather than working together to sort of do the best for France and to put France on a democratic footing. The temptation of Robespierre's, the power that has corrupted Robespierre, and the temptation to deliver on his Rousseauian, utopian, impossible worldview is too much of a temptation, and the fact that Danton is the one standing in his way to do that, somebody who he is a little bit corrupt. He is a man of the people. He's a vulgar man. He's everything that Robespierre is. He is not, and so to knock this one down is very, very tempting. But he knows, and Danton knows himself, that the sacrifice that Danton makes and that their faction makes in their deaths and going to the guillotine is that France can have a new rebirth in this revolution and knocking down this tyranny and ending the terror, because ultimately the terror The guillotining, the thousands and thousands of countless numbers of dead, the insurgency in the Vendée, and the drowning people in boats because of where they were from, and shooting people point blank. And it's effectively the same tactics that we would see later on dictators use to eliminate political enemies and undesirable ethnic groups as well. This is what was applied by the Committee of Public Safety, and Robespierre understands that this is going to be a Pyrrhic victory, so they will not withstand doing this to the Danton faction. So we get to the point now at the end of the movie where Danton willingly goes to the guillotine, and with obvious arrogance and pomp as he is, and his attitude, he says to the Sanson, who is the executioner, "Show the people my head, it's worth seeing." After he is guillotined and killed, we see Robespierre later on in the movie then becoming very, very ill, and later on he would himself, after somewhat recovering from this illness throughout the movie, he himself would meet his end at the guillotine, along with the extremists Saint-Just and Couthon, and the Committee of Public Safety would be overhauled and effectively disbanded later on, and a new form of government, the Directory, would be instituted in 1795. So overall, I mean, the film is a tale of doing what you need to do in order to achieve the overall larger goals of your nation, of what you want to see, your worldview as well. Danton understands that if he goes back to Paris, that this is likely going to be the outcome. He's a threat to the government, and this is effectively plays out exactly how he wants it to play out. The best case scenario for Danton would have probably been winning the trial, and the committee being overthrown, and Danton being released, and then becoming himself either king or governor or president or prime minister or something like that. But that never happened. The fact that the terror, one of the catalysts for the later displeasure with Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, was the fact that that bureaucratic machine that Danton ironically had helped set up was his own downfall, and that then also would go by the wayside somewhat after his own death and after Robespierre's death, where the government was entirely reformed. The terror, the sort of the dark, really sort of not frugal, but the really sort of austere, poverty-stricken, extreme days of the terror were put by the wayside, and France could move on to reforming and becoming a proper democratic nation. But overall, I would say that the film was fantastic. It's very much a film of its time. I would like to see the play, actually, the original 1920s play, just as a bit of a comparison to the movie. But I think the movie is fantastic, and I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5 personally, just because I like Depardieu as Danton. I like the story of this crucial part of the revolution and the downfall and the destruction, really, which the revolution wrought, especially the famous phrase that all revolutions eat their own children, and that is true. I mean, it doesn't matter who they are, they do eventually fall by the wayside. It's people. You look at people like Leon Trotsky, with the Russian Revolution, killed. People like Lenin, he died naturally, obviously, but there's other people who were instrumental in revolutionary movements who ended up getting killed. So it's that classic phrase, live by the sword, die by the sword. I hope you do enjoy the movie, though. This one is a lot more widely available than the other film, La Révolution Française, but this one you can get on DVD for like $5.99. Watch it on Amazon Prime or on YouTube as well. But yeah, it's widely available, a fantastic movie, and if you love your history, this is superb as well. It's a very sort of glum movie, but very, very interesting in terms of the time period and the battle, the spiritual and the ideological battle going on between the two foes is very, very intriguing, and survives to this day as well. So yeah, brilliant. I hope you liked the video, and let me know if there's any recommendations you have as well. But I very much appreciate if you could give me a like and also subscribe.